Today I want to share with you the best kitchen tools and kitchen equipment for the new traditional foods cook. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now in this video, I'm going to go over 3 groups of equipment for making some traditional nutrient-dense foods. I'm going to talk about what you need to make bone broth, what you need to make ferments, and what you need to be a home baker. Now, if you open the description underneath this video, there will be timestamps listing everything that I'm going to cover, so you can jump ahead or jump around to whatever particular subject you're interested in. Also, when you're in the description below, be sure to check out all the discount coupon codes I have for various things that I'm going to cover in this video. But keep in mind, this is not a sponsored video. I have purchased all of these things myself and I use them on a regular basis and I highly recommend them. But also, you can certainly find many of these things at your local grocery store in the kitchen aisle, often at thrift shops, as well as just general kitchen stores in your area. Today I'm primarily speaking to the new traditional foods cook, but hopefully I'll share a few items that even those of us who are a little farther on our traditional foods journey will find helpful. And when I say new traditional foods cook, what I'm referring to is a home cook who's moving away from buying processed foods, what I often refer to as the processed foods kitchen, from buying processed foods, buying pre-prepared foods, and moving more to making things homemade and making those homemade foods that are considered traditional foods, traditional nutrient-dense foods that I've shared with you over the years, including things like bone broth, ferments, cultured dairy, sourdough, so on and so forth. Now keep in mind, you don't need to go out and buy all of these things on day one when you decide you want to have more of a traditional foods kitchen. These are things that you can acquire over time. And I'm going to discuss some of the very basic things that are great to start with, and then things that you can add on over time as you may want to upgrade a bit. And these items are also great for putting on your wish list for your birthday or for Christmas or other holidays when people want to give you a gift. Now, the first thing I want to start talking about is what are some of the best kitchen tools and kitchen equipment for making bone broth. Many people often ask me where they should start if they want to make the move to having a traditional foods kitchen. And I always tell them one of the best places to start is to learn how to make bone broth, because bone broth is really the workhorse or the backbone of a traditional foods kitchen. Now, I just want to quickly mention that I have a lot of videos on how to make bone broth, as well as how to make various nutrient-dense foods that we're going to be talking about today. But I will put all of them in a playlist for you, and the link will be in the description underneath this video. Now, the simplest way to get started making bone broth, regardless of what type of bone broth you're making, beef bone broth, chicken bone broth, pork bone broth, fish bone broth, any bone broth, is simply to have some type of stock pot. Now, what I've got here is a 16-quart stock pot. The smaller one is a 10-quart stock pot, and this one is somewhere in between. This is almost a 12-quart stock pot. When it comes to making beef bone broth, I really like to have the larger stock pot, and the chicken bone broth can often work very well in a slightly smaller stock pot. Now, what I want to mention about these stock pots is that these are enamel-lined stock pots. And if you're familiar with the book Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, which really sort of kicked off bringing back the traditional foods movement in the late 1990s, Sally recommended that one of the best ways to make bone broth, if you were making it on the stovetop, we'll talk about other ways to make it in a minute, but if you're making this on the stovetop, she recommended that an enameled pot was the best, because in her personal opinion, she felt that it was the least reactive. You wouldn't want to use aluminum because you do add an acid into your bone broth to help extract the nutrients from the bones. But also too, she wasn't keen on stainless steel, which is interesting. But that is something that you want to keep in mind, that you may want to look for an enameled pot. But certainly, in my humble opinion, I think it's okay to use a stainless steel pot as well, if that's what you have. Now, these type of graniteware pots make wonderful stock pots, and they may look familiar to you if you're a canner. They come with the canning rack. So this pot does double duty, and it's enameled, and you can not only use it as your stock pot, you can also use it to do your water bath canning. And if water bath canning is something that interests you, I won't go into a lot of detail about it today, because I have a whole series of videos, I have a whole playlist all about everything you need to start water bath canning, from the equipment, the supplies, all of that. I'll be sure to put that in the description below as well, if that's something that interests you. But the nice thing about these pots, these ones that are water bath canners that can also be used as a stock pot, they're very affordable. These two that I have here, these enameled pots, are made by Le Creuset, and they are a little more expensive. But any of these make a nice choice, because these enameled pots are relatively light. So it's easy to move them from the sink into the stove, and from the stove back to the sink. Whereas your heavier cast iron enameled pots that often you think of when you hear the term Dutch oven, that are enameled, they're very expensive generally, and they're already very heavy. So then if you start adding liquid and bones and so on and so forth, it can almost become very difficult to lift. Also, they're generally not deep enough or large enough to really accommodate everything that you need to make your bone broth. Now, another way to make bone broth is to use a slow cooker. I love using a slow cooker. This is about an 8-quart slow cooker, and it has a warm, low, and high setting. On this particular slow cooker, I find that I have to use the warm setting to make my bone broth, because you like to keep bone broth on a very low simmer, around 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And the low setting on my slow cooker actually goes quite a bit higher than that. But I have found that the warm setting works very well. Alternatively, if you are in a rush and you want to make your bone broth quickly, you can always upgrade to using an Instant Pot. Now, the Instant Pot is going to be quite a bit more expensive than an enameled stock pot or a slow cooker, but it also does double duty with being able to be used to make a lot of other things in your kitchen. But that's something that you can also keep in mind. So once you have the major equipment, whether it's a stock pot, a slow cooker, or an Instant Pot, the next thing you want to think about are the kitchen tools that you need to help with the bone broth making process. Something like one of these spider strainers works really well. But if you have a mesh strainer like this, you can also use that as well. And this also can do double duty, which we'll talk about in a minute. But something like this is very helpful, removing the bones and the vegetables from your bone broth. Once you get all your bones and your vegetables out of your bone broth and you're left with your liquid, there are going to be little bits and bobs of tiny bits of meat, some of the seasonings you may have added, some of maybe very small pieces of vegetables that have started to disintegrate, and so on and so forth, that simply weren't caught with your strainers. So what I like to do at that point is to strain my bone broth. And that's where these flour sack towels come in very handy. Can you use cheesecloth? Of course. However, cheesecloth, if you make bone broth a lot, can be kind of expensive. You might be able to rinse it out once, maybe twice, but it's going to start to deteriorate, and at some point you're going to have to throw it out. These flour sack towels really last. Some of these I've had like 20 years, and I just rinse them really well and then wash them and fold them up, and they're ready for their next bone broth work. What I'll do is take a mesh strainer. You could also use a colander if you have one of those. And then I'll just take my flour sack towel and I'll line my mesh strainer like this, and I'll put this over a bowl or a very large, I have an 8-cup measuring cup that can work very well for the job too. And then I will simply take a ladle and scoop out the broth that is going to go through this flour sack towel, and which will be and also be having some shape to it. That's why I use the mesh strainer. And this will catch a lot of the debris that would otherwise have escaped just the general removing of bones and veggies. In my bone broth videos, I go over this and show you what I'm doing in great detail. But here I just wanted to touch on the various pieces of equipment and tools that I like to use. Once I have my bone broth that has now been filtered through my flour sack towel, I have an option of what I want to do. And what I generally like to do is use this fat separator. This is such a clever device. And all you do is pour your broth through here, and you have to do it in batches because I think this just holds about 3 or 4 cups. But you pour your broth through here, and then there's a little device here on the bottom. There's a little thumb press here, and the fat will float to the top, and then the broth will come out at the bottom. And then I have just pure plain bone broth with the fat removed. I really like that. Now, I don't throw the fat away. I save the fat to use for cooking. But this way, I now have, in essence, not in the chef's term clarified broth, but just sort of in the home cook's term clarified broth, which I then can decant into containers like this. These are just French working glasses or French jelly jars, they're often called. And I can just pour my now clarified, in essence, bone broth into here, and then I'll put this plastic lid on, and I often store this in the freezer. Now, I leave a good amount of headspace in here because it is going to expand when it's frozen, but these are very heavyweight. You could also use wide-mouth canning jars, but again, you have to be very careful about headspace. You want to leave plenty of room for it to expand when it's frozen, the broth. But I really like these jars in particular because these plastic lids will simply loosen. If by accident you fill it a little too much, you don't have to worry so much about breakage because you might with a canning jar, because all it will do is just push off this plastic lid, and the worst thing that'll happen is a little freezer burn on your bone broth. Other times, I'll just go ahead and fill up a half-gallon jar like this and put it right in my refrigerator. It'll stay fresh for about a week, and in a week's time, my husband and I will definitely have drank this as a sipping broth, or I will have used it in cooking. Now, don't worry if you don't have a fat separator. Alternatively, what you can do is what I've done here. You can simply put this into a half-gallon size jar or a bowl, whatever you have, and when you put it in your refrigerator, the fat is going to float to the top and it's going to become solid, and you can either remove it at that time and use it for cooking, or some people actually like to take some and melt it with their bone broth when they're warming it up to drink or to use in cooking. And the nice thing about storing your bone broth like this is if you do not want to freeze your bone broth and you just want to refrigerate it, leaving the fat cap, so to speak, on top helps insulate your bone broth and keep the air out and keep it fresher longer. It can generally last in your refrigerator like this for at least 2 weeks. Now, something I want to mention about decanting your bone broth. If you're using this fat separator, it's very easy to simply put this right over the top and just press down the lever and let the bone broth drain in, and leaving the fat behind. The same in your smaller jars as well. However, if you're not using the fat separator and you want something that helps you a bit in case you don't have the steadiest of hands like me, having a wide mouth funnel like this can work very well. Assuming you have a ladle, you can just start ladling it in to your jar, and that's makes it a very easy job and a neat and clean job. And speaking of ladles, that's something that I wanted to mention. In this video, I am really just focusing on the equipment involved, the more specific equipment involved in making these various nutrient-dense foods. I'm not covering very basic things like a ladle or a spatula or a wooden spoon. There are so many wonderful videos on YouTube that talk about how to equip the brand new kitchen. So I am making a few assumptions that you have some basic equipment, but if not, yes, you would be wanting to look at some of those videos to think about adding little by little very basic equipment like a good cutting board, a kitchen knife, a spatula, ladle, wooden spoons, bowls, so on and so forth. And I also wanted to mention that in the description below, I will put links to the various pieces of equipment that I'm mentioning in this video, especially things like the fat separator that I get a lot of questions about. However, as I mentioned back in the beginning, be sure to keep your eyes open at your local grocery store or a local kitchen store. These are actually pretty common to find in various stores. So I'm confident that you can have good luck finding that locally. Now, when it comes to making beef bone broth, because the popularity of bone broth has really soared, you can usually find some nice quality bones at your grocery store or a specialty grocery store or the farmer's market, or maybe even from a local rancher. But if you ever are challenged in finding the bones that you want, I always recommend buying some bones from US Wellness Meats. They're an online seller. They have lovely beef bones for making bone broth with, and they have bulk pricing. And I also have a discount code for you in the description below if you ever decide to order from them. And they really have a very nice product. And I have an unboxing where I show you various bones that I've purchased from them. I also want to mention that if you make chicken bone broth, you can certainly just use the chicken carcass. But if you really want to up, so to speak, the gelatinous nature of your bone broth, increase the gelatinous nature of your bone broth, chicken feet are great. Sometimes they're called chicken paws, and they sell them at my local grocery store. I've seen them at the farmer's market, and you can also get those from US Wellness Meats as well, and they sell them in a nice bulk package like this. The next set of kitchen equipment and kitchen tools that I want to talk about are those that you'll need when you want to start making ferments. Now, what are ferments? Basically, as the name implies, ferments are something that has been fermented. It's the process of fermentation. So you may take cabbage and slice it up and mix it with some salt, pound it down into a jar, and let it sit on your counter for a few days as it ferments. Now, why do we want to do that? The reason is we make the food much more digestible, and we make the nutrients in it more absorbable to our bodies, our gut, as they say. Plus, it also creates an environment of good bacteria. We hear the word probiotics a lot. And fermented foods like this, what we're talking about here are basically vegetable ferments, but cultured dairy would also be included here. And what they do when they're high in probiotics is they are very good for our gut health. And scientists tell us the healthier our gut, our intestines, the healthier we are. So the equipment I'm focusing on here is basically for making vegetable ferments like a sauerkraut. And I have a lot of videos on how to make all different types of fermented foods, not just vegetable ferments. I also show you how to make fermented condiments like ketchup and mustard. And I also show you how to culture dairy, which is a ferment. And I also have videos on sourdough, which is also a ferment. But when we often think of fermentation and ferments, we think of the vegetable ferments, and that's why I'm focusing here on these particular tools. But something I want you to keep in mind if you're interested in culturing dairy, like making homemade yogurt or making kefir or kefir, depending on how you say it, it's very easy to do, and you really don't need any special equipment. I have a video where I show you how to make homemade yogurt, and all you need are 2 bowls. So it's very, very basic. And with kefir, all you need to do is source the grains and then have a little jar. I often make my kefir in a little French working jelly jar that I mentioned before. And so you don't really need anything special, and chances are you have on hand whatever you need when it comes to making cultured dairy. So I'll be sure to link to those videos. It'll be in that playlist that I talked about when it comes to making nutrient-dense foods, so you can just scroll through that and see what subjects interest you. Now, when it comes to making vegetable ferments, what you're really going to want to have on hand are a selection of different sized jars. Now, what I have here are canning jars, and these three are wide mouth canning jars. But pretty much any type of jar you have, preferably a glass jar, and one that is food safe, will work fine. And I prefer a wide mouth jar only because it's easier to get the ingredients in and then to also get them out when you want to eat them. For the most part, when I'm making a vegetable ferment, I really like to use a half-gallon jar. But certainly you can make different ferments in a quart-sized jar, and when it comes to making fermented condiments, a pint-sized jar can work very well. Now, really all you need to make fermented vegetables is your jar. And even if you don't have something like this, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can use a wooden spoon, anything that you have on hand that, again, is food safe and used in your kitchen, to just compress the vegetables that you've got in your jar as tightly as possible. Because the whole point of fermentation is that it's an anaerobic process, one that means without air. So you want to get everything tightly compressed in your jar, and as you're pressing it, often because it's mixed with salt, the vegetables begin to release their liquid. You can also top it off with extra water, but the bottom line is you want everything under that water. So once you get everything very well compressed in your jar, you need a little something to keep everything weighted down. Now, the simplest thing that I've found to do is to simply use a little 4-ounce jelly jar. This is just a canning jar. And what I'll do is once I get everything packed really tight and nice into my jar, I'll just put this right on top. And this will serve as a wonderful weight to keep everything weighted down. So I personally find that this is the most economical way to make ferments. A half-gallon canning jar or any other half-gallon jar you have, and then a little jelly jar or any other type of little jar you may have. If you've ever seen the little jars that the pimentos come in at the grocery store, it's a glass jar, clean it up really well. That'll work very well. That'll fit in. And this is another reason why I like the wide mouth jar, because it's very easy to put the jelly jar into it. Then all you need is the lid that came with your jar. This is just a storage lid that's made by the same people who made the canning jar. But again, whatever jar you have, you put this in, and then you're going to put your lid on, and it's going to press everything down further, hold this in place, and now you've got your ferment ready to put on your counter and allow a few days or a week, depending on what the temperature is in your kitchen. And I go over all of this in my fermentation videos, and you're done. It's so easy. And all you have to do with this system is, as you see all the bubbles, that's the carbon dioxide that's being produced. It's being released by the good bacteria as it's making the good probiotics. It's going to be releasing a lot of the CO2 gas, the carbon dioxide. And you'll just want to, every day or so, as you see all those bubbles coming up, just release your lid a little bit, let the gas out. You don't want anything to crack or anything like that, so you don't want to let all that CO2 build up. And then you just tighten your lid again. And then you just do the same thing after another day or two as you see the bubbles building up. And when you do this, you might hear whoosh or something like that. And then you can just put that tighten that right back up again and let it ferment as need be. Now, if you don't have these storage lids and you just have a canning lid, that's fine too. You'll have the canning lid and the canning ring. You're just going to want to release the ring. And if you don't hear any air being released, you may have to just loosen the canning lid that may have tightened up a bit to the top of your jar. You'll hear a little bit of a whoosh probably when you go to release that. Then put it back on, put your ring back on, and you're all set. But as you can see, this is a very simple and inexpensive way to get started with ferments. Here's your lid, exactly what I was talking about, and your ring. And I really like the idea of starting out like this, because this way you know if you like making ferments and if it's something that you enjoy eating before you upgrade to buying equipment that definitely will help you ferment. But at the same time, if it's not something that you're going to find that you're going to do on a regular basis, I think keeping things very simple and very affordable is the way to go. Now, if you want to use a very simple system like this, but you just want to add in a little extra tool, I highly recommend something like this. They come in all different kind of shapes and sizes today. And this is just called a kraut pounder because it's often used to make sauerkraut. And this will help you compress the food that you're fermenting. And it works a little more efficiently than a wooden spoon. And they're very affordable. And so this is something that you can really add to your fermentation lineup of equipment. Also, having a stainless steel funnel on hand, a wide mouth stainless steel funnel, can be very useful. And you may have purchased this to use when you're making bone broth. And if so, it can do double duty. I find this keeps everything sort of neat and sort of corralled, so to speak, especially if you're putting in cabbage and other thinly sliced or chopped up veggies, being able to just put them into the funnel and drop down into your jar, as opposed to trying to kind of do like this to keep them from falling over the side. This can come in very handy, and these are very reasonable. Now, if you want to upgrade further and get a little more fancy with some actual fermentation equipment, there are a lot of things on the market. There are all sort of little air bubbler chambers and all types of things. To be honest with you, I really don't get that fancy. However, I was very intrigued with the products that were offered by Mason Tops. So a while back, I purchased one of their kits. It's called the Complete Mason Jar Fermentation Kit. And this has really come in very handy. And as I mentioned, not a sponsored post. I purchased all of this myself, but the people at Mason Tops are so sweet, and they did give me a discount coupon code for my viewers for their products, so be sure to check that out in the description below. But this is a very clever set, and what's very nice about this, it comes with everything you need except the jar and the canning ring, and I'll explain all of that process in a minute. But they have a nice little recipe book with it, and then inside they include a kraut pounder. Now theirs is a little different than the one that I originally bought for myself, but this has got a real nice grip to it, and it's very easy to use. Plus, what they also include in their kit are the glass weights, and they basically replace the need for the little jelly jars. And you can just go ahead and drop that in. Sometimes it's a little precarious. Some of the weights, mine's a little bit of an older set. I think some weights now have a little, like a little handle almost on the top that makes them easy to get in and out. But these definitely help keep everything submerged. Finally, what interests me are these things they call pickle pipes. And this, I think, is something very clever. What you do is, once you get all of your veggies in here and you've got all your liquid covering your veggies, and you either use your little canning jar, your little jelly jar, or you use one of these glass weights, you then just take your little pickle pipe, and this has a very tiny little hole on the top that when it normally will look closed, but when the CO2 gas needs to be eliminated, it simply pushes its way out of this little hole. And then when everything calms down, the little hole closes. So it lets the CO2 out, but no oxygen in, because oxygen is or air in general, is the enemy of fermentation. And so this is a very clever device. You will need the canning ring, though, and I know this is why some people prefer some of the other systems that have the bubblers that you just screw right on and whatnot. But I think this is a very clever system, and one that's very affordable. If you just buy the little pickle pipes, they're very reasonable. And then you just go ahead and you put your canning ring on, and you don't have to worry about the burping process. It's going to basically burp the CO2 gas out for you. Now, as I shared, I always like to use wide mouth jars when it comes to fermentation. However, Mason Tops also makes the pickle pipes for the regular mouth jars as well. And if you find that you're making your fermented condiments like mustard and ketchup in your smaller jelly jars, and you want to just use something like this because those tend to just have a regular mouth on them, these work great as well. So although ferments may, as I am often fond of saying, be a little persnickety, getting started with them in terms of kitchen equipment and tools is very easy. And I just want to add a little note here for those of you who are new traditional cooks or new to fermentation. Fermentation does have a little bit of a learning curve, but just keep good notes in your kitchen journal as to what you feel worked, what you felt didn't work, and then just tweak things a little in terms of the temperature in your kitchen or where you placed your ferment and so on and so forth. And after the second or third time, I'm confident you're going to have a lot of success and be very happy with the results of your ferments. Now I want to discuss some of the kitchen tools and kitchen equipment that you'll find very helpful as you begin to start baking at home. And the nice thing about becoming a beginning baker, chances are you have some of the basic equipment you're going to need already on hand. Now here we're just going to talk about equipment and tools. However, if you want some helpful information on stocking your baking pantry with different flours and ingredients, I'll be sure to link to that video in the iCards and in the description below, where I go through a lot of detail and a lot of options, including gluten-free information. Basically what you need to get started is a bowl. What I have here is actually a set of 10 bowls that all nest into each other. This just comes in handy for so many uses in the kitchen, so I really like this set. But just one large bowl and maybe one medium-sized bowl is really all you need to get started. Even one bowl can work. Next, you're just going to want to make sure you've got some measuring spoons. You may already have these on hand. And then you're going to want some measuring cups for measuring dry ingredients, measuring your flour. And then you're just going to want to have some type of measuring cup that measures liquids, because you measure liquids and you measure flours separately in a different way. Now I've got a whole host of measuring cups here. I've got the 1 cup, the 2 cup, a 4 cup, and an 8 cup. I find measuring cups like this come in real handy in the kitchen, not just for baking, but for all sorts of things. In the previous segment on bone broth, I talked about lining my strainer with the tea towels. Well, what I normally do is put that strainer with the tea towel on top of this large measuring cup and then pour it either through my fat separator or right into my storage jar. So these come in very handy, and they're very reasonably priced. I highly recommend having a nice selection of measuring cups. And I really like the glass measuring cups. You can certainly get them in plastic as well, but I find the glass, it holds up beautifully, and I know it's always food safe. And last but not least, of your very basic ingredients, a wooden spoon, or even a spatula will work. Something that can help you mix the dough in the beginning when it's kind of wet and sticky, and then later on you're just going to get in with your clean hands. And if you have one of these, it's sort of a combination of a spoon and a spatula. They may call it a spoonula or something like that. These come in very handy when making quick breads, because you can really get every little last bit of batter out of your bowl. But for the most part, bowls, measuring cups, measuring spoons, and a wooden spoon are going to serve you very well, whether you're making a yeasted bread or a quick bread or homemade cookies, whatever the case may be. Now, if you want to get a little fancy and have a little help when you're mixing dough, especially yeasted doughs, these Danish dough whisks work really well. I have a smaller one and a larger one. And if you don't have an electric mixer, these can be a lifesaver, especially if you find with your hands mixing it, get tired, or your wooden spoon doesn't work very well. These, I know they're funny looking, but they work fantastic. I highly recommend adding these as a little bit of an upgrade to your baking equipment. Another tool that comes in very handy, especially when you're working with dough, whether it's sourdough or yeasted dough, and when it came to these Danish dough whisks, whenever I use the expression yeasted dough, I'm also including sourdoughs, doughs that you're using to make breads. These bench scrapes come in very handy because you can really get the dough off of your cutting board if it's sticking or whatever surface you may be kneading it on. But I will say the metal ones with the wooden handles, they're a little more expensive. But truth be told, I actually really like the plastic ones the best. They're very light and they work beautifully. And the fact that they have this little rounded edge here, they work well in the bowl. So you can really get into your bowl and really scoop out your dough. And then you can use the flat edge on your cutting board or whatever surface you're kneading your dough on if it sticks. Now when it comes to actually getting whatever you're baking into your oven, you need different types of equipment depending on what you're baking. Now for a sandwich bread or a loaf bread or a quick bread, these type of pans work great. I really like glass. I just put a little paper towel in to separate them so they don't stick. But these work wonderful. You can also use metal pans. I've used these as well. I just enjoy baking with glass because I can see exactly how things are browning up and coming along. And I will say that I also apply that same rule to my pie dishes. If you've seen my recent pumpkin pie video that I made from the Little House on the Prairie cookbook, I use a glass pie dish, and I generally really like baking with glass, and I think it can be very helpful for the beginner because you really see what's going on. And generally, whatever type of loaf pan you buy, whether it's something like this in glass or something in metal, these are generally very affordable. And usually, I won't say always, but usually I see these for sale in the kitchen aisle at my grocery store, so they're very accessible. Next, having some type of muffin tin is a very good thing to have on hand. Now this is, the Texas size muffin pan. These make the real big muffins. Your smaller muffin tin will probably have 12 spaces, and then they have the mini muffin tins, which make the cute little mini muffins. I'm not sure, does that have like 24 on it? Possibly. But having this is very handy if you do like to make muffins. And any kind of muffin tin can really do double duty with different types of things that you may like to make. You may see recipes for making little bits of stuffing or little baby meatloafs or different things like that. So I definitely think adding a muffin tin to your kitchen equipment, to your baking equipment, is going to come in very handy. And the same for sheet pans. Now this sheet pan, excuse me if it doesn't look in perfect condition, this is about 25 years old, if not older. But these are wonderful to have. First of all, as it says, it's a sheet pan. This is a half sheet pan. You can also get a quarter sheet pan, a full sheet pan, definitely, but I think they're definitely available, but I think that's more for a commercial kitchen. I certainly couldn't fit it in my oven. But this is great for making a sheet cake, or if you decide that you're wanting to make like a boule, a round loaf of bread, you can put it on here. You can even turn it upside down like this. Don't look at the back. But it also can work great for putting your boule right on here if you don't have a pizza stone. Also putting your pizza pie dough on the underside can work really well. So I highly recommend for beginners, in addition to some of the basic things that we talked about, adding, obviously you're going to need some type of baking pan, but adding a muffin tin and a sheet pan can be very helpful. And just like the muffin tin, this is going to do all kinds of double duty for you, because if you've ever seen some of my videos on roasting a chicken, I often say if you don't have a roasting pan or a cast iron pan or something that you can use to roast your chicken in, you can roast it right on your sheet pan. It really, it serves so many uses in the kitchen. You can roast vegetables on here. You can use this when you make cookies. So these are very affordable, and you're going to find so many uses for it. Now, as you become more experienced and you decide that you want to start making artisan breads, whether yeasted or sourdough. Having some type of Dutch oven can be very handy to get that real crisp exterior, but yet nice crumb inside your bread. Now, when it comes to Dutch ovens, there are so many different options available to you. And like so many of the things we've discussed today, they serve all sorts of purposes in your kitchen, not just for baking a round boule of bread. These very heavyweight cast iron pans are often made by companies like Le Creuset or Staub, which made this one. Lodge, the people who make cast iron, also make an enameled cast iron Dutch oven. So there are options out there. What you want to keep in mind is if you are looking for a Dutch oven to use to make bread in, you're going to want to make sure that the knob is oven safe up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And it usually looks like it's a stainless steel knob. And some of you have asked me whether I like Le Creuset or Staub better when it comes to Dutch ovens. I actually like them both. I'm kind of new to Staub. They had a while back, there were a couple of sales, and so I decided to buy the Staub to see how I liked cooking with it. And it basically works identical to the Le Creuset. However, what I will say, based on some of the questions that I had from you, was that did I prefer the darker interior? The Staub has a dark interior versus the light interior that the Le Creuset has. And I will say this is very nice because it doesn't show the stains and so on and so forth that can accumulate, with cooking in a beige colored, light colored enamel pan. However, that said, most of the Le Creuset I have is very old. And I gather that the Le Creuset that they make today with the enamel coating is made in some fashion to resist staining. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you're looking for something that really doesn't show any stain at all, Staub is the way to go. But I would really keep an eye open for when these are on sale, because this is, you're making an investment when you buy something like this, but it's going to last you a lifetime and then some. You're going to pass it on to other family members or friends, and these I really feel basically last forever. However, definitely keep your eye open when they have sales, or if you have a outlet store near you. I know there's a Le Creuset outlet store here in Central Texas that I've been to a few times, and so if you don't mind a few little imperfections, you can get wonderful savings. Now, just like baking in the enameled cast iron, you can just bake in regular old-fashioned cast iron. And this particular pot is one that I highly recommend. It's very reasonably priced, and it really does do double duty, so to speak, because the lid can be a frying pan. And then you've got this beautiful Dutch oven down in here. But something that I really like about this pan, and as a beginner you may have not made a Dutch oven bread yet, but if you've had, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to preheat these in the oven so they're very hot. And when you bring them out, you need to drop your boule, the dough that you've shaped into a boule, you need to drop it down into your hot oven and then put the lid back on and get it back into your oven. Some people will use parchment paper to lower it down, and then towards the end of the baking, pull the parchment paper out. I'm not a huge fan of that, just in my personal experience, and I'd be interested in hearing what you all have found to be. Leave it in the comments below. But I find it just doesn't brown up as well, even after you remove the parchment and give it a little extra time in the oven. I really like to just be able to dump my boule right in. But you have to be very careful because this really is piping hot. With this pan, the job is so easy because you're not dropping it down into the deeper part of the Dutch oven. You can put it right here on the frying pan part, the lid part. And so you don't have those high sides to potentially burn your hands. You just dump your bowl down, then, with your pot holders or your oven mitts, whatever you use, you can just go ahead and put this right down on top. Then you just transfer the whole thing to your oven and you're all set. So I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful cast iron pan to have in your repertoire because it really serves everything. It's deep enough to fry chicken in. You've got this part where you can fry up bacon, you can make eggs in here, whatever the case may be. And then you can also use it to bake your bread and just make life a little easier and not be as nervous about having these hot sides near your hands. Now, those of you who are very good about wearing oven mitts or those silicone oven mitts, you might be laughing at me, but I'm one of these old-fashioned cooks. I've always got my hands and maybe a couple of little thin pot holders. So that's why I'm talking about how wonderful this particular pot can be. As you become a more experienced home baker, you may find that you really want to start buying whole grain as opposed to flour that's already been ground. Now, I have a number of videos on buying whole grain and storing whole grain. I'll be sure to link to those. But the reason that you want to consider buying whole grain is really multifold. Number one, whole grain stores beautifully, as opposed to flour that doesn't store as well. The shelf life for whole grain can start maybe around 8 years, and meaning that you can keep it for 8 years and it still be fresh, up to 25 years and maybe even beyond, depending on what type of whole grain you're storing. Whereas flour, like an all-purpose flour or a bread flour where all the bran and germ has been sifted out of, that may last, 1 to 2 years. And then your whole grain flours, like whole wheat flour, that may stay fresh for 6 months to a year. So as you see, whole grain is going to last a lot longer. However, when you start to buy whole grain, you need to have a way to grind it into flour. I have a video where I show you 3 different ways to do this. One is using a manual grain grinder, which is great to have, especially if you live off grid or you don't have any electricity. You can always grind your grain, and I highly recommend those. But next, there are your electric grain mills. And I really love my Mock Mill, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the third way is some of the high-speed blenders do recommend that you can grind grain in them. Sometimes you need a special canister to do it in, but they recommend that yes, you can grind flour in them. And one of my good friends uses a Vitamix to grind her grain into flour. And she has a little tip that I want to share with you because I think it's very clever. She freezes her grain before she grinds it in her Vitamix, because that helps keep it cold and prevent it from overheating. Because you never want to overheat your grain as you're grinding it into flour, because heat is the enemy of the oils that are naturally occurring in whole grains. So after a lot of research, as I said, I had a manual grain grinder, I still have it, that I had bought years ago at Lehman's. And if you shop at Lehman's, be sure to open the description under this video where I have a lot of different coupon codes for their store. And that's where I had bought my manual grain grinder. And I even got a flywheel with it because it just makes it a lot easier. And they sell all of these things. However, as time went on, I really wanted to have an electric grain mill. And I did a lot of research. And I decided on the Mock Mill. And as I said, none of this is sponsored. I purchased this myself after doing a lot of research. And I have the Mock Mill 100. I have a video where I show an unboxing of this, which I'll definitely link to. But this is terrific. This is made in Germany, and it is just made so well. And I find that when I grind my whole grain in here, the grain that comes out into the bowl, I'll just put a bowl underneath here, is such a beautiful consistency, and it's not hot. And so I'm really happy about that because I'm basically protecting the oils, as I mentioned, in the whole grain. And it's so easy to use. You just plug it in, you drop your grain down here in the top, and then you decide on your setting what coarseness or lightness you want to your grain. I generally grind my grain on a 5, but you can put it all the ways up to a 10 or down to a 1, depending on what, as I said, level of coarseness you're looking for. And the people at Mockmill are so nice, because I so fell in love with this grain grinder. I contacted them and asked them if I could have a discount coupon code for my viewers. So be sure, when you're in that description underneath this video and you decide at some point you want to buy a Mockmill, make sure that you have that discount coupon code. Now, one other thing you'll want to keep on hand if you decide to start buying whole grain and grinding it into flour, you'll want to think about buying some sifters. And these are very reasonable. You can even use a fine mesh strainer like what we talked about when we were going over the bone broth equipment. That can do double duty for you. But fine mesh strainers come in varying degrees of fineness of their mesh. And these are very reasonable, relatively easy to find. If you have a baking store in your area, like a commercial baking store, kitchen store, or online, they're always available. But what's nice about these is that you will put your flour, when it comes out right out of your grain mill, you'll put your flour in here, and then you can sift out as much bran and germ as you want. So you can create an all-purpose flour, you can keep it completely whole grain, or you can do what I like to do and sift out it's a guesstimate, about a quarter of the bran and the germ, which still leaves in a lot of nutrition, but at the same time helps make a lighter dough. And I never want you to worry about sifting out some of the bran and the germ. Now you can sift it completely out and have all-purpose flour, which is still nutritious, especially if you're using some of your ancient grains like einkorn. And it's going to continue to be nutritious if you turn it into sourdough, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But I never want you to feel bad about sifting out some of the bran and the germ, because this was a common practice of our ancestors. You can go back to the Middle Ages and learn how bakers back then were sifting out some of the bran and the germ, about a quarter or so, because they knew that it would create a lighter, tastier bread, and one that was easier to digest, because often it's the bran and the germ that's a little more difficult for us to digest, especially when it's not been turned into a sourdough. And even when it comes to making sourdough, removing some of that bran and germ, whether it's a yeasted bread or a sourdough bread, just is going to help to make a lighter loaf, a tastier loaf with a nicer crumb, and something that, yes, even if you are making sourdough, is still going to be a little more digestible than a 100% whole grain sourdough bread. So for very little money, these are an excellent investment if you find you want to start creating, grinding your own grain and creating different levels of flour. And I have a video where I show you how to do all of this. In the video, I'm grinding einkorn berries, and I show you what the whole grain einkorn flour looks like. And then I show you what one looks like with just some of the bran and germ sifted out of it and how to do it. And then I show you one that I've basically, for the most part, sifted out the bulk of the bran and the germ to make a home version of an all-purpose flour, in that case, an all-purpose einkorn flour. Now, when it comes time to allow your sourdough breads or your yeasted breads to rise, your glass bowls will work fine. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this segment on baking equipment, I use glass bowls, but you can also use stainless steel bowls if you find those lighter and easier to work with. And some glass bowls, and maybe even stainless steel bowls, come with plastic lids that you can just put right down onto your bowl and use that as the cover while you're allowing your dough to rise. But if you don't have any type of cover, a little plastic wrap or a dusted tea towel, anything like that will work very well. But there are a couple of pieces of equipment that I want to talk about here that as you get more into home baking and you start upgrading and you want to add different pieces of equipment or tools, whatever the case may be, to your baking kitchen, then some of these can come in very handy. I really like this plastic bin. These are very common. They're easy to find at a lot of the big box stores. You can also find them online. They come round like this or square, whatever's easiest for you to store. What I like about this is you can put your bread in here and you can just give it time to rise, and because it has the measurements, you can get a very good feel on if it's risen correctly. Also, what's handy about this is it can hold a nice amount of dough. So if you like to do those 5-minute-a-day breads, bread in 5 minutes a day, where you make a large amount of dough and you put it into your refrigerator and you just let it live in there and pull dough out as you want to bake different things, and that can last you a week or two, this type of container comes in very handy. Also, this is a bread rising basket, and this has a little cotton liner here. You can either use it with the cotton liner, or you can flour this very well, or flour your liner very well, whatever you're using, and you can allow your dough to rise in here, generally on the second rise. And what's so cute about this, and this is known as a banneton or a Bratform, I think the Germans may call it. But what's nice about this is what gives your boules, your round loaves of bread, the pretty pattern that you may see on some breads at the bakery. So this is a very nice thing to have. Definitely an add-on over time as you decide that you really want to start making a lot of boules and you like the pattern that this creates. These can be a little costly, and that's why I really feel that this is an add-on for down the line. It's more of like a little bit of a luxury item because you really want to look for the ones that are made in France or Germany. There are a lot of knockoffs that are made in China today, and you'll see they'll be much more reasonably priced. But I personally think that the level of quality of the ones that are made in France or Germany are much nicer. Now, as you continue on your traditional foods baking journey and you decide you want to start making sourdough, you're going to need a sourdough starter. Now, I have a number of videos where I show you how to make different sourdough starters, and that's definitely something that's very doable. You can also buy a little sourdough powder or even a little actual wet sourdough starter in a jar from different baking companies to help you kick off your own starter at home. But it's relatively easy to get one going in your own kitchen. It just takes, like ferments, it can be a little persnickety, and so you need a little trial and error, but I'm confident that over time you can definitely develop something that'll be a very nice starter. And once you do that, you're going to need something to store your starter in. Now, you can just store it in a little container like this. This has a little locking lid. This can be very handy if you only feed your starter once a week and tend to keep it in the refrigerator because you're not using sourdough starter every day. You could also use a canning jar. You could use one of those French jelly jars that I like to store my bone broth in. You really have a lot of options. If you're like me and you like to have a lot of sourdough starter, what I like to do is, and these are just little stacking bowls here that serve many purposes in my kitchen, but I'll often make my sourdough starter in a large container like this because I find I can really aerate it, and I think this is a good tip for beginners because it loves all the natural yeasts and good bacteria that are occurring in the air. And so I can really give it a good stir and incorporate a lot what's in the air. And then I really like this plastic lid because as I'm leaving this on my counter, I can just leave it slightly ajar. I don't have to put it down firmly like this. Again, allowing some of the natural yeasts in the air to get into my starter. But if for some reason, and you may have experienced this, if you have tried making sourdough starter, that sometimes the good bacteria can take over and outnumber the yeasts. And whether it's the good bacteria that's stronger or whether the natural yeasts are stronger really does affect the taste of your bread. And so sometimes people will say, oh, I smelled my starter and it smelled so strong, almost like acetone, which is like nail polish, what nail polish remover is made of. Say, oh, it smells like nail polish remover. That's generally an indication that the good bacteria has taken over and is stronger than the yeast. So why I like this container is I can just take this, put this lid on, and pop this into my refrigerator. And I'll continue to feed it every day, but while it's in the refrigerator, the yeast tend to proliferate a little more than the good bacteria, because the yeast can handle things when it's a little cold, but the good bacteria likes it when it gets a little warmer. So that kind of helps even things out. I have a video all about troubleshooting, about making sourdough starter, and then 10 problems that you will often encounter, but how to fix them. And I'll be sure to link to that. So these are some handy things for storing your sourdough starter. As I mentioned earlier, you probably have some basic equipment in your kitchen that you're using to cook with and whatnot. And as you start to bake and become more of a home baker, you're probably going to find yourself making more homemade pie crusts. So you may already have a rolling pin. This is just a good old-fashioned wonderful rolling pin. This actually belonged to my mom. So I know this is something that's probably leans to more basic, but the reason I wanted to mention rolling pins is that this may be a particular type of rolling pin that as a beginner you may not be familiar with. This is a French rolling pin, and it doesn't have the handles like the more typical American style. And I think there's some other European countries that also use this style with the handles, but this one is typically called a French rolling pin and more commonly used, I gather, by French bakers. But something that I find is really nice about this particular style to think about adding to your collection as you bake more, that sometimes rolling with this, I have no problem doing a pie crust, and my hands, I don't have any trouble with my hands underneath the handles of the rolling pin. I find it works very well. However, certain things like that you want to roll really thin, this works very well, and you just kind of can roll your dough back and forth, back and forth. Maybe you're making some very wafer thin cookie, or this works very well when you're making homemade cereal, if you've ever tried doing that, or homemade crackers that you want to have be very thin. I really like this, so I highly recommend that if you've had some challenges when you've been trying to make a pastry or a cracker or a homemade cereal, and you've had some challenges with your traditional rolling pin, that the French rolling pin may be something you want to consider. And speaking of rolling pins and maybe rolling out pie crust, I just wanted to show you my pie plate that I mentioned earlier. Like some of my bread loaf pans, this is glass and it is wonderful to work with. And these are very affordable. Probably you can find these at pretty much any big box store. But what's nice is, especially as a beginner, you're able to check the bottom crust of your pie and you can see if it's baking well. So I highly recommend glass, as I did with the loaf pans. I highly recommend them for pie dishes as well. And speaking of making pie crust, having a pastry blender is a very handy thing as well. But again, this is an add-on because you can easily make your pie dough using 2 forks or 2 knives. You just want to cut it up to the point where it's kind of sandy with sort of pea-sized pebbles throughout. But this is something you can think about adding over time. Now this is really a specialty item as you go along your continuum of becoming a home baker. Now I have a recipe video for you where I've showed you how to make a super easy no-knead sandwich bread that is very similar to the ones you can buy at the grocery store in the plastic wrap. But if you want to get fancy and make a sandwich bread that will be perfectly shaped, this is what you need. Now this is a small version, they come in a large version also, and this is called a Pullman pan. and you will make the most amazing sandwich bread in this. So over time, as you become a better home baker and you want to start making really what I consider kind of fancy sandwich bread, this is what you're going to need, and it's called a Pullman pan. Well, if you have enjoyed learning about all of this equipment that can really help you in the kitchen on your traditional foods journey, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have a full playlist that I call Mastering the Basics of Nutrient-Dense Foods Cooking, where I teach you how to make bone broth, cultured dairy, ferment, sourdough, and lots more. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.